I don't get involved in my personal. We have funds that run my money. They invest my money, and I don't talk to them. I don't even speak to them.
There's a famous saying in American politics, what remains hidden is often more dangerous than what has already been uncovered. And if that saying holds true, then what is unfolding around Donald Trump today may be only the opening chapter of a much larger story. As questions surrounding President Trump's financial interests continue to grow during his presidency, with some reports estimating his wealth has expanded to roughly $2 billion, the issue has begun to resemble a balloon that keeps inflating, leaving many wondering how much larger it can become before it reaches a breaking point. Over the past several days, the spotlight in Washington has shifted. The conversation is no longer dominated solely by immigration policy, tariffs, or the latest clashes between Trump and Democrats. Instead, a new wave has emerged, increasingly vocal calls for broad investigations into the financial interests of the Trump family. These are no longer isolated accusations circulating through the media. Senior Democrats are now openly laying the groundwork for what could become a long-term political and congressional investigation after the midterm elections. In other words, they are no longer simply criticizing Donald Trump. They are preparing for an investigation that could stretch on for years. One reason political observers are paying close attention is the assessment from Maggie Haberman, one of America's most experienced journalists covering Donald Trump. According to Haberman, years of investigative reporting have revealed only the tip of the iceberg. The public knows only what has already surfaced. Everything beneath the surface remains largely inaccessible. That observation deserves careful consideration. If even major news organizations like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post acknowledge that they have barely scratched the surface, it suggests the amount of undisclosed information could be far greater than the public currently imagines. That is precisely why Congressman Robert Garcia's recent interview has attracted so much attention. Garcia was not speaking like a political commentator. He was speaking like someone preparing for an investigation. His message was unmistakable. In his view, the Trump family did not simply benefit from political power. He argues they transformed political power into a business model. That is an extraordinarily serious allegation. Garcia pointed to a wide range of questions involving alleged access to the White House, business contracts, investment activities, and relationships with foreign companies and governments. It is important to emphasize that these are political allegations raised by Democrats and have not been established as facts by a court of law. But perhaps the more important story is not any individual allegation. It is the way Democrats are constructing the larger narrative. Rather than focusing on one isolated incident, they are attempting to connect dozens of separate events into a single coherent picture. That strategy is hardly unusual in congressional investigations. A single incident may spark controversy, but a series of interconnected events presented as part of a logical pattern can generate enormous political pressure. One example repeatedly cited involves the period when Donald Trump paused certain tariff policies, after which the stock market rallied sharply following reports of numerous investment transactions associated with his name. Critics argue that the timing deserves investigation. Trump's supporters counter that linking the two events is speculative and that no evidence has demonstrated any violation of the law. That is the central issue. At this stage, the battle is no longer confined to the courtroom. It is increasingly becoming a battle over how the facts themselves are interpreted. One side argues that the evidence points towards systemic corruption. The other views the entire effort as a politically motivated campaign designed to weaken Donald Trump. Another revealing detail is that Robert Garcia has spoken openly about what Democrats would do if they regain control of the House of Representatives. He has made little effort to conceal his intention to use Congress's oversight authority to summon numerous individuals connected to the Trump family. Among those mentioned are Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Jared Kushner, and several close associates. Garcia argues that such actions would not be unprecedented. He points to Hunter Biden's congressional testimony as evidence that the relatives of a sitting president can legally be required to appear before congressional committees. If that scenario unfolds, Washington could enter another prolonged cycle of political confrontation. Public congressional hearings have long been among the most powerful weapons in American politics. They are not designed merely to gather information. They also shape public opinion in profound ways. Sometimes a single viral video clip lasting only a few minutes can reshape the national political conversation for days. Another point worth examining is Garcia's repeated emphasis on Congress's subpoena power. That was no accidental remark. In the United States, congressional subpoenas allow lawmakers to compel individuals or organizations to produce documents and testify before investigative committees. If those individuals refuse to cooperate, the dispute can ultimately move into the federal court system. In other words, subpoena authority represents one of the most important legal tools available should Democrats choose to significantly expand their investigations. At the same time, Garcia acknowledged that such efforts would face considerable obstacles. He argued that the current Department of Justice is unlikely to be a willing partner and predicted lengthy legal battles, emphasizing that investigators must be prepared for intense political resistance. The interview also addressed the controversial jet reportedly provided by Qatar. Garcia argued that the image of an American president using an aircraft supplied by a foreign government carries significant symbolic implications. He questioned whether transferring that aircraft to Donald Trump's future presidential library rather than keeping it as government property would be appropriate. Once again, this remains an issue under public debate, with no final determination from the appropriate authorities. Looking at the broader picture, perhaps the most significant development is not any individual controversy. It is that the United States has entered an era in which virtually every presidential decision is immediately scrutinized through the lens of potential conflicts of interest. That reflects a level of political polarization that shows little sign of easing. If Republicans retain control of Congress, many of these proposed investigations may struggle to gain momentum. But if control shifts after the midterm elections, Washington could witness a wave of congressional hearings, subpoenas, and extended legal battles. Whatever the ultimate outcome may be, one thing appears increasingly certain. The political battle surrounding Donald Trump is no longer centered solely on campaign rallies, speeches, or social media confrontations. It is steadily moving on to another battlefield, one defined by investigations, congressional oversight, and public accountability. American political history has repeatedly shown that what happens inside a congressional hearing room can sometimes have far greater consequences than anything said from the podium at a campaign rally. That is why the months ahead may become one of the most closely watched periods in modern American politics. Not only because of Donald Trump's political future, but because these investigations may reveal far more about the complex relationship between power, money, and influence inside the political system of the world's largest democracy.